I had never imagined myself in a situation like this. I mean, we all have fantasies, right? Weird, twisted thoughts that slip into our minds late at night. But to be living one, well, that was a whole other level. It all started when I moved to my uncle's place after getting a job in his city. Seemed like the perfect opportunity. Avoid paying rent and all that. But what I did not expect was the effect my uncle's wife, Anna, would have on me. She was stunning in a way I had not anticipated. When they first got married, I hardly paid her any attention. She was this quiet, small-town girl, and honestly, I had my doubts about her. My uncle was 14 years older than her, and I always wondered why she had agreed to marry a guy like him. He was a cop, the old-school type. Rough around the edges, chauvinistic, and frankly, a bit of a jerk. Over the years, he had only grown worse, becoming bitter and increasingly unpleasant to be around. But Anna? She had changed too, though in all the right ways. When she first joined the family, she was kind of plain, friendly but unremarkable. However, living in the city had clearly had an effect on her. She picked up on fashion trends, started dressing better, her confidence bloomed, and she became one of those women who commanded attention in any room she entered. She was no longer the simple girl from a small town. She had grown into a woman who knew her worth. Still, I never thought about her in that way. She was family, after all, but living in close quarters with her started to mess with my head. I would come home from work, and there she would be, laughing, chatting about her day, her eyes lighting up every time she shared a funny story about her kids. And when she laughed, God, that laugh! It got under my skin in a way I could not explain. It was infectious, sure, but there was something more. Something that pulled me in, made me want to hear it again and again. At first, I told myself it was nothing. I was just happy to bring a little light into her life, especially with the way my uncle treated her. He was often out on business, and even when he was home, he barely paid her any attention. I felt bad for her, and maybe that was it. But then I found myself buying small gifts for her. At first, it was harmless, little things like chocolate or a book she had mentioned wanting to read. But soon, I started imagining her when I was alone. It was a slippery slope. My late-night searches on the internet became more specific. I was looking for videos where the woman reminded me of her, always trying to find some release for the feelings I did not want to admit were building inside me. Things changed one evening when my uncle had left for a week-long trip. Anna and I had gotten into the habit of sitting at the kitchen table after the kids went to bed, talking about anything and everything. But this time, the conversation took a turn I was not expecting. "I am thinking about taking the kids and leaving for a while," she said, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. I blinked. What? Why? Her eyes dropped to the cup, and for the first time in a long while, I saw how tired she looked. "It is just, I need a break. From him, from this house. But the kids, they adore him, and every time I mention us leaving, they lose it." I could hear the frustration in her voice. My uncle might have been a lousy husband, but he was still their father. "You ever think about moving somewhere on your own? Getting a fresh start?" I asked, keeping my tone light, though I was starting to feel the weight of her words. She sighed. "Every day. But it is not that easy." We sat in silence for a while, the only sound coming from the distant hum of the fridge. It was then that I realized how close we had become. Not just physically. We were sitting only a few feet apart, but emotionally. I was her confidant, the one person in this house she could really talk to. And that realization hit me harder than I expected. Because, deep down, I wanted to be more than just someone she vented to. I wanted to be the one she turned to in every sense. That night, after she had gone to bed, I lay awake, my mind racing. Every part of me knew this was wrong. She was my uncle's wife, for God's sake. But that logic seemed to lose its power when I thought about the way she looked at me now, with something more than casual interest. A few days later, things came to a head. It was a lazy Saturday morning, and the house was unusually quiet. My uncle had left the night before, the kids were still asleep, and Anna was in the kitchen, working on something. I walked in, half asleep, and saw her struggling with her phone. "Here, let me help," I offered, moving behind her. She handed me the phone, but instead of taking it back to fix whatever issue she was having, I pulled a chair up next to her. I leaned in closer, explaining how to navigate the settings. I could feel her warmth, the scent of her perfume filling my lungs as I got closer. The proximity was intoxicating. I am not sure what came over me, but I could not help myself. Her soft, floral scent mingled with something earthy, something uniquely her, and my pulse quickened. I could feel my body reacting, and I did my best to hide it, shifting awkwardly in my seat. Later that day, I went down to the basement where she was ironing clothes. It had become a routine by now, us chatting while she worked on the endless mountain of laundry. But this time, things felt different. There was a charged tension in the air, one I could not ignore. As I sat down, she sighed deeply. You know, when he comes back, it is just going to be the same. He will criticize my weight, even though I have had 2 kids and barely a moment to breathe. He will tell his stupid stories about work, and I will have to pretend to care. That did it. Something inside me snapped. You are kidding, right? You look amazing. Seriously, I do not know how you do it. She blushed, waving off my compliment. You are just saying that because you feel sorry for me. No, I said firmly, turning to face her, my heart racing now. I mean it. I have seen how people look at you at those family gatherings, how other men can barely keep their eyes off you. You are incredible. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something in them I had not noticed before, a flicker of desire. She looked away quickly, but the moment had already passed between us, unspoken yet undeniable. Do not get any ideas, she said with a soft laugh, trying to break the tension. I smiled back, but the electricity in the room was impossible to ignore. The line we had just danced around was getting dangerously close to being crossed, and part of me wondered how much longer we could resist. Over the next few days, things between us only grew more intense. Every glance, every small touch felt like fire on my skin. I could tell she felt it too, though we both pretended everything was normal. But it was far from normal. Every night, I would lie awake, replaying the moments we spent together, wondering if she was doing the same just a few rooms away. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I could not stop myself from wanting her. One evening, after another one of our late-night talks, things finally boiled over. My uncle was still away, and the kids had gone to bed. Anna and I were sitting in the living room, talking about nothing in particular, but the air was thick with tension. She was curled up on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, and I was on the chair across from her, watching the way her fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of a pillow. You know, she said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence, it has been nice having someone around who listens. I smiled, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I am glad to be here for you. Her eyes met mine, and I could feel the weight of everything unsaid between us. You have been more than just here for me, she said, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. You have been something else? I swallowed hard. There it was, the opening I had been both dreading and craving. What do you mean? I asked, even though I knew exactly what she meant. She looked away, her cheeks flushing slightly. I do not know. It is just, with you, I feel like someone actually cares about me. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I stood up, walking over to the couch, and sat down next to her. The room seemed smaller all of a sudden, and the space between us felt like it was charged with electricity. I could see her breathing quicken, and I was sure she could see the same in me. I do care about you, Anna, I said, my voice low and steady. More than you realize. Her eyes flicked up to mine, and there it was, that unspoken desire. The thing we had both been tiptoeing around for weeks. I knew I should have stopped it right there, gotten up, and walked away. But instead, I reached out, gently taking her hand in mine. Her skin was warm and soft, and the moment I touched her, it felt like something inside me clicked into place. She did not pull away. In fact, she leaned in slightly, her breath hitching. This is wrong, she whispered. But there was no conviction in her voice, only the sound of someone trying to convince themselves of something they no longer believed. I shifted closer, my knee brushing against hers. The contact sent a shiver through me. I know, I whispered back, my lips dangerously close to hers. But it does not feel wrong, does it? She hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching mine, as if trying to find some way out of this. But then, with a quiet sigh, she closed the small distance between us. Her lips were soft against mine, hesitant at first, but within seconds, the hesitation melted away. The kiss deepened, and I could feel the urgency in both of us. It was as if we had been holding back for too long, and now there was no stopping it. Her hands moved to my chest, gripping the fabric of my shirt, pulling me closer. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling the warmth of her body against mine. Everything else, the house, the kids, my uncle, it all faded into the background. In that moment, it was just us. We pulled apart briefly, our foreheads resting against each other as we caught our breath. "What are we doing?" she murmured, though her lips were already seeking mine again. I kissed her once more, slower this time, savoring the feeling. "Something we should have done a long time ago," I whispered against her lips. She let out a soft, almost defeated laugh. "God, you are right." Before either of us could second-guess ourselves, she stood up, taking my hand and leading me toward the stairs. My heart was racing, but I followed her without hesitation. We were both walking into dangerous territory, and we knew it. But it did not matter anymore. The pull between us was too strong to resist. Once we were upstairs, she led me into her bedroom, shutting the door behind us. The room was dark, save for the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the curtains. I could feel the anticipation in the air, thick and heavy, as we stood there, looking at each other. She moved toward me, her hands sliding up my chest, and I pulled her close, capturing her lips in another kiss. This time, there was no hesitation, no second thoughts. Her fingers tangled in my hair, and I could feel the heat of her body pressing against mine. We stumbled toward the bed, lips never leaving each other, and as we fell onto the mattress, everything else ceased to exist. The feel of her skin against mine, the taste of her lips, the quiet gasps she let out as my hands roamed her body. It all felt like a dream. A forbidden, dangerous dream. But it was happening, and neither of us could stop it. Our clothes disappeared in a blur, and soon, there was nothing between us. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the way she trembled beneath my touch, and it only fueled the fire burning inside me. I had never wanted anyone the way I wanted her in that moment, and from the way she clung to me, I knew she felt the same. She pulled me down onto the bed with her, her breath ragged as she whispered my name. It was the way she said it, the way her voice trembled with need, that broke any remaining resolve I had. I kissed her deeply, my hands exploring every inch of her body, committing it to memory as if this was the only chance I would ever get. There was no rush, but the intensity between us was undeniable. Every touch, every kiss, felt like it carried the weight of all the moments we had held back. She arched her body against mine, her nails digging into my shoulders as I moved over her, our breaths coming in shallow gasps. Time seemed to blur as we gave in to what had been building between us for weeks. The connection, the passion, it was overwhelming. When it finally happened, when we crossed that final line, it felt like everything had been leading up to this moment. Her soft moans filled the room, mingling with the sound of our ragged breathing, and I lost myself in her completely. For a while, there was only the sensation of our bodies moving together, the heat and intensity of the moment carrying us away. It was everything I had fantasized about and more, so much more. And when it was over, when we were both lying there in the aftermath, tangled in each other's arms, I knew there was no going back. We lay there in silence for a long time, neither of us willing to break the spell. The room was quiet, save for the sound of our slowing breaths. I could feel her heartbeat against my chest, and for a moment, everything felt right. But as the reality of what we had done began to settle in, I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. I shifted slightly, propping myself up on one elbow to look down at her. She was staring at the ceiling, her expression unreadable. "What now?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. She closed her eyes, letting out a slow breath. "I do not know," she admitted, "but we cannot stay here like this." She was right. We had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. And while part of me wanted to stay in that bed with her forever, I knew things were about to get complicated. Very complicated. The reality of what we had done hit us hard as we lay there, the weight of our actions slowly sinking in. I could see the conflict in Anna's eyes, even though she was trying to mask it. She shifted slightly, pulling the blanket up over her, and I could feel the tension between us. What had started as something uncontrollable and passionate now felt different. She sat up slowly, her back to me, her silhouette barely visible in the dim moonlight. I could see her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. "We should not have done that," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. I sat up beside her, my heart still racing, trying to find the right words. "I know, but I do not regret it, Anna." She turned to face me, her expression a mixture of sadness and something else, something I could not quite place. "You should. We both should." I reached for her hand, my fingers grazing hers, but she pulled away. The sudden coldness in her gesture stung more than I wanted to admit. "Do you really think that?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. Her gaze fell to the floor, and she shook her head, but then her eyes met mine, filled with confusion and fear. "I do not know what I think. This, you and me, it cannot happen again. It should never have happened in the first place." I wanted to argue, to tell her that what we shared was real, that the connection we had was not something we could just ignore. But deep down, I knew she was right. The consequences of this were more than either of us had bargained for. She was married to my uncle, and this would destroy more than just their marriage. It would tear our entire family apart. I sighed, running a hand through my hair, trying to collect my thoughts. "What are we going to do?" I asked, the weight of the question heavy in the air. She bit her lip, her eyes flicking toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "We have to go back to how things were before. Pretend this never happened." I laughed bitterly. "You really think we can do that? Just forget it all?" Her silence was answer enough. We both knew the truth. We could not forget, no matter how much we wanted to. The memory of tonight would always be there, lurking just beneath the surface. But pretending, that was something we could at least try. Anna stood up, pulling on her robe, and I could see her hands trembling as she tied it around her waist. "You should go," she said quietly, not looking at me. I hesitated, not wanting to leave things like this, but there was no point in arguing. She had made up her mind, and I knew pushing her now would only make things worse. Reluctantly, I got up, gathering my clothes and dressing in silence. The room felt colder, the intimacy of earlier moments now replaced by a thick tension that neither of us could break. As I walked toward the door, I paused, turning back to her. "Anna." She shook her head quickly, cutting me off. "Do not. Just do not." I swallowed hard, nodding. There was nothing more to say. With a final glance, I slipped out of the room, closing the door softly behind me. The hallway was dark and quiet, but my mind was a storm of emotions. My heart was pounding in my chest, the adrenaline from what had just happened still coursing through me. But now it was mixed with something else, guilt. I had crossed a line, and I was not sure how to move forward from this. The idea of facing my uncle, of pretending like nothing had happened, made me feel sick to my stomach. As I crept down the stairs, my thoughts were racing. How had things gotten so out of control? How had I let myself get swept up in something that was clearly going to end badly? But even as I tried to berate myself for it, I could not shake the feeling that I did not regret it. Not the way I should have. I spent the next few days trying to avoid Anna, which was not easy considering we were living under the same roof. Every interaction felt charged, even though we barely spoke more than a few words to each other. The tension between us was palpable, and I could feel her discomfort whenever I was near. It was like the air in the house had shifted, heavy with the weight of our shared secret. But as much as I tried to keep my distance, the pull between us was still there. I caught myself staring at her when she was not looking, remembering the feel of her skin against mine, the way her lips had tasted, and when our eyes did meet, there was something in her gaze that told me she was thinking the same things. Then, one evening, the storm finally broke. I had been holed up in my room, trying to distract myself with work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to her. I was restless, unable to focus, when I heard a soft knock on my door. My heart skipped a beat. "Come in," I called, though I already knew who it would be. Anna stepped inside, her face pale, her eyes wide and filled with something I had not seen before: fear. She closed the door behind her, leaning against it as if she needed the support to keep herself standing. "We need to talk," she said, her voice shaky. I nodded, sitting up straighter on the bed, feeling a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "What is going on?" She crossed the room quickly, sitting down on the edge of the bed, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I cannot do this anymore. I cannot pretend like nothing happened." I stared at her, my mind reeling. "What do you mean?" She let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she ran them through her hair. "I cannot stop thinking about you, about us. And I know it is wrong. I know it is crazy, but I cannot." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been trying so hard to push everything down, to pretend like we could just move on. But hearing her say it out loud, that she felt the same way, made everything I had been trying to ignore come rushing back. "I cannot stop thinking about you either," I admitted, my voice low. "But what are we supposed to do? This is insane, Anna. We both know how this ends." She looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I do not know. I cannot go back to the way things were. I do not want to." Her words hung in the air between us, the finality of them sinking in. There was no going back, not now. We had crossed a line, and no matter how much we tried to pretend otherwise, things would never be the same again. For a long moment, we just sat there in silence, the weight of our situation pressing down on us. And then, without thinking, I reached out, taking her hand in mine. She looked up at me, her expression a mixture of relief and sadness. "What are we going to do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I squeezed her hand gently, though I did not have an answer for her. All I knew was that I could not walk away from this, walk away from her. "We will figure it out," I said quietly. "Together." She nodded, and for the first time in days, I saw a small glimmer of hope in her eyes. It was a fragile thing, but it was enough. In that moment, I knew we were on a dangerous path, one that could destroy everything if we were not careful. But as I looked at her, sitting there beside me, I knew that whatever the cost, I could not let her go. The storm we had unleashed was far from over, but for now, we were in it together, and that was all that mattered.